Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, criminal court, and other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com. And the books you can find also on Amazon, and they are in audio as well. I have a return guest on. I have Debbie Carroll. She's back on, and she's joined by Kathryn Hall. Now, Kathryn Hall is one of the faces of the Angel Families, an organization that has brought their stories of their deaths of their children by illegal immigrants to the forefront of the American consciousness. Her story has been told by Terri LaPoint in the book Voices That Will Not Be Silenced. Kathryn and her family are more than survivors. Kathryn is a powerhouse. She's a spokesperson for Angel Families and exposure of corruption by the child welfare system. Now, what had happened to Kathryn is she has had one loss after another in her life. First, her granddaughter, Brooklyn, was removed from her daughter, Hailey, while they both lived with mom and dad in Arkansas in 2015. At the age of 17, Child Protective Services expected Hailey to get a full-time job, complete high school, and move into her own apartment and meet all demands of a dependency and neglect case to get her baby back. However, within a year, a dreadful thing happened. Hailey and her friend were riding home on a scooter which was hit by a man driving a speeding truck 71 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone, and she was thrown onto the hood. He didn't stop, but continued on, swerving back and forth until he knocked her off the truck. He continued driving till he reached and noticed sparks underneath the truck and stopped to find that he had dragged the boy on the scooter the whole time. The man, here illegally, ran from the scene. He did not turn up for 2 days. He was charged with leaving the scene of an accident. Now, Kathryn reached out to several Arkansas legislators to try to get justice by having the truck driver charged with murder. She was simultaneously trying to get her granddaughter home. Finally, she met up with Linda Collins Smith, who was in her last 4 months as an Arkansas state senator. Then the unthinkable happened. In 2019, Kathryn and Senator Collins Smith were poised to expose a criminal scheme involving CPS and Miss Collins Smith's husband, who was a judge, but she expired in her own home. And I welcome you both to Slam the Gavel podcast. Now, we are not lawyers, and the views expressed by our guests are not reflective of our own. So I welcome you both, Debbie and Kathryn.
Thank you.
Sorry for everything you have been through. I'm very honored to have you on.
No, thank you. I'm happy to be here today.
Just wanted to speak up and say that I had the privilege of getting to know Kathryn Hall through Paige Clark, who is running for Massachusetts State Representative based on a connection that she made from Marianne's podcast, The Slam the Gavel, when I had done one entitled Foster Class Warfare. And Kathryn lives in Colorado Springs. I'm up in Littleton, Colorado, and we got together and actually went to Washington, D.C. together a couple weeks ago. So basically, I met Kathryn through your efforts, Marianne.
Oh,
that's so helpful. We have a strong network, and we're trying to get the word out about the horrible stories, and Kathryn's is just a hallmark of terrible events that not all caused by the government, but the government did not handle very well. What I would like to do is to offer to show you the
okay.
And so, Kathryn, you want to tell us about the cover?
The first picture is my daughter Hailey and my granddaughter Brooklyn. Next to her in the black is Senator Linda Collins Smith. Um, and then the two bottom pictures are pictures that I took when we went to Washington, D.C. Linda had accompanied me um, to stand behind me with Angel Families. We were there for a rally and to meet with President Trump.
Okay.
It's a it's a beautiful cover.
Thank
Voices
you.
that will not be silenced. And there's Terri LaPoint, who has been doing stories of medical kidnapping, mostly articles. But when Kathryn told Terri about her story, Terri realized this is not just a series of articles. This is an entire book, and that was published in 2024. And one way of supporting Terri and Kathryn is to purchase the book.
It's for sale on Amazon.
Yep. So, Kathryn, um, your story begins before the tragedy of her death.
Correct.
Your daughter was born premature, and she had hearing problems.
Yes, she was 90% deaf at the point where she lost her life.
And tell us, do you want to tell a little bit about how the kidnapping took place?
Well, my daughter she was a young mother to start with. And then after the birth of Brooklyn, she had some postpartum depression and she went into a facility for a short time. And it wasn't maybe a month later after that that she went to go visit she'd been working very hard in school trying to make sure she graduated. She had signed up for the delayed entry program with the Navy and was looking forward to her future. But she was working part-time after work and going to school full-time. She needed a break and it was a 3-day weekend, so she wanted to go to her cousin's house. And Brooklyn, her daughter, had had a little cold and she didn't want to, it was where she was going was out of state. So
Mhm.
she asked me if Brooklyn could spend the weekend with me while she went, and I told her yes, she deserved a break. And so she went to her cousin's, and that she left on Thursday night. Well, on Friday morning, um, we had a knock at the door, and it was a uh, CPS worker and two police officers. And they asked where Brooklyn was, and I told them she was in the room sleeping. And they insisted that we give Brooklyn to them, that they had had calls that Hailey had abandoned her.
Oh,
How old was Hailey, Brooklyn at the time?
Brooklyn was,
I
I
think
believe,
just over a year.
13 months. Yeah.
oh.
Um, anyway, and I said, she didn't abandon her. She just went to her cousin's for the weekend. And they
Mhm.
said, she said she needed me to bring Brooklyn to her right now. And then asked me to pack a diaper bag for her. And I was arguing with her. I was like, you can't just come in and take her. And she said, I can, and I am. And here, the police were there to back her. We didn't know, she said there'll be a court date in a couple of days. So I called Hailey on the phone right then. I said, here, you can talk to Hailey. And Hailey told him, I'll get on a plane and I'll come home right now. I didn't abandon her. I'm just at my cousin's for the
Mm.
weekend. And they said, told Hailey, no, they were taking her to call them when she got back.
Without a court order.
Yeah, and we didn't know they had to have a court order at the time. I mean,
Mhm.
my husband had just not long retired from the army, and we moved to Arkansas because my parents were elderly and needed help. We hadn't been there for very long, so my husband and I both thought, okay, well, we'll go into court then, and this will all be figured out. And I was still devastated to have to hand over Brooklyn, um, in which I did. Hailey flew back into town and she got back. By the time she was able to get another flight, it was the next morning. And she called DHS at that point, said, I'm going to come down and get my baby. And they told her that if she were to show up at the office, that they would have to arrest her.
And that was on a Friday. The office probably wouldn't even have been open, right? I
It
mean,
was a holiday.
oh,
It was a holiday weekend. Yeah.
This is
And
terrible.
so you later found out that they did hold a hearing on that Monday, but you were not notified of it.
Correct.
What was their plan for Hailey? What did they want her to do?
Well, when we finally did get into a hearing, it was about 2 weeks after they took her. Nobody was allowed to see her. We didn't know where she was. We kept calling every day, when is this hearing? Well, we'll let you know. We'll let you know. Um, and then I called, it was like 2 weeks later, and I called, and a different lady answered the phone. And I told her I was trying to find out when the hearing was, and I gave her the information. And she said, well, she was just to stand in, let her see if she could find it. And she said, oh, it's today at 1 o'clock. Well, this is at like 11 o'clock in the morning. I was like, what? And they said, yes, there's a hearing today at 1 o'clock. Well, apparently it wasn't the normal lady who answers the phone. I just happened to get lucky when I called, and somebody else was just standing in for her. And we went to the courthouse, and when we walked in, they ask you what case you're there for, because the courtroom, or the courthouse where it's at, was only that courtroom, the
Mm.
only family court judge there, in the only family court judge, uh, the only family courtroom. And when I told them, the police officer that was standing there at the metal detectors told us to wait right there. Well, it was about 10 minutes later, he came walking back and then handed us subpoenas to be there at that time on that day that were never given to us. Um, we went in, and they gave us all attorneys, and Hailey an attorney and us an attorney, and told her that they wanted her to um, do counseling, do that. And this, by the
Mm.
way, this happened to be on Hailey's 18th birthday, the
Oh.
day of her 18th birthday. And or no, I'm sorry, it was 4 hours before her birthday.
Mm.
By the time we actually sat there till 7 o'clock that night before we got into the courtroom, from 1 o'clock until seven, why they called other cases all in front of ours.
Hmm.
So when we got in there, they told her that until they worked everything out, because now all of a sudden they had messages or information saying that Hailey and Brooklyn were both being abused by us. There wasn't a mark on either one of them. Neither one of them. They had a very nice, clean home. Hailey was very family orientated. She was the youngest between my husband and I of seven. Um, Very loved. Brooklyn was very loved, very well cared for. But they told her that they wanted her to, and she said, no, I'm going to be 18. And they said, if they looked right at her and told her, if you want to get your baby back, this is what you need to do.
You
And
missed what you
and
said though. They wanted her to do what?
go into foster care,
They were
because they'd
taking
had
an 18-year-old
allegations
year-old girl and putting her into foster care.
4 hours before she turned 18, and then told her, well, if you do this, because you'll be turning 18 tonight, you'll get, we can help you with housing, you'll get grants for school and all this stuff, and it'll really help your life out and whatever. And Hailey was like, no. And I said, Hailey, just do what they want you to do.
Mm.
Okay. I don't, and I looked right at him and I said, please make sure she makes it to school, because she's so close to graduating. I don't want this to mess it up so that she's unable to go in the Navy and do what she's wanted to do. Oh, yeah, yeah, we promise. They took her 4 hours away with no transportation. They put her into a foster home. She called me that night. She wasn't supposed to have her phone, but I guess apparently she snuck it in. And she called me and said, you've got to come get me right now. This man, and this is the second day after she had spent the night there. Um, she said, this man is getting drunk and he keeps trying to kiss me and everything else. And I said, what man? She said, the foster dad. I was like, are you kidding me? So I said, Hailey, maybe you're just misunderstanding or something. Just give it a little bit. So later that night, she called and said, come get me now. Now
Mm.
he's coming into my bedroom. So we did. My husband went and picked her up, and she called in the next morning to DHS and told them what was going on. And they said, well, the judge isn't going to be happy. And um, she was like, I don't care. I'm not staying there when this man's trying to sleep with me.
Hmm.
So we went back into court 2 weeks later, and they told her they wanted her to take UAs. They set up visitation twice a week with her, um, with us and with her mother. They did one alone with her. No, we did an hour with mom. And then the last hour of the 4 hour visitation, Hailey had alone with her.
Mhm.
So we did that, and then we went back into court, and then they started saying that, uh, how Hailey had left the foster home and whatever. And I brought up then, I said, she wasn't even able to make it to school. You guys took her 4 hours away. How was she supposed to get to school? Excuse me. So they
Well,
told her they weren't.
they purposely placed her with somebody they knew. I mean, they know these people. The go-to foster parent, right? The home for a 18-year-old girl or teenage girl. Maybe they didn't realize, maybe he didn't realize she was an adult. Maybe he did. I don't know. But
Well, I don't know, but they had her go into another one, and they told her, the judge ordered that once she was to get at the other one and get settled, that Brooklyn would be placed with her until everything was settled. So Hailey said, okay, of course she's going to jump at that to have her baby back with her. Well, they take her straight from the courtroom that day, and they took her out to the foster home. And Hailey talked with the foster mother and the foster father about Brooklyn coming. They had no issues with it. Well, 3 days later, Brooklyn still isn't there with her. And Hailey starts asking questions, and the lady's like, I don't know. I don't know I can't answer that. I don't know what they're doing. So Hailey called the worker on the third day, and she told her, well, the only foster home we could take you to, they don't accept children. And Hailey said, I'd already talked to them. They said they were fine with Brooklyn coming here with me. And the lady said, well, no, they're not certified to take care of an infant. And so we can't place Brooklyn there. And Hailey said, then I'm leaving. And she left the second time. And that would be the last time she would go in. They then started saying they wanted her to go into a mental health facility, a juvenile mental health facility,
Mhm.
um, and have treatment in pay. And she was like, for what?
Right.
And they never did
she
give
was
her
a
an
fighter.
answer.
She was a fighter. She wasn't putting up with it.
Yeah. And
And they're just fishing for how to get another case. So they basically, this is the tack that I think is going to get more people involved, is like they just not only took one case, but they opened a separate case for her.
well, then we received some letters in the mail, my husband and I did, saying that they put us on some registry for abusive
Oh,
parents. And we were like, what? We were not abusive. And so we had to wait again another month to get back into court again. And when we went into court, um, my attorney said, don't even worry about this, that I'm taking care of it. And she'd called the investigator that had removed Brooklyn up and asked her if she had a court order that day to remove Brooklyn. And she said, well, I'd been out to the house 2 or 3 times and nobody ever answered the door. So I got a verbal okay from the judge. And she said, you had a verbal okay to remove the child? You'd never even seen the child. What were, and she said, well, I forgot to bring the case file today. So I can't remember all the dates. And she said, did you know you were coming to this hearing today? And she said, well, yes. And she said, but you happened to forget the case file with all the information. And then she asked her about filing those papers on abuse on us. And she said, no, she didn't do that. And she said, okay, well, if you had done it, who would have filled it out? And she said, well, she would have. And she said, okay. And would you have had to have that signed by anybody else? And she said, no, because she was the lead investigator. And she said, and you're positive you never filed any kind of abuse on the halls? And she said, no, she didn't. And my attorney had our copy of it and showed it to her and asked whose signature was on it. She said hers. Um, and, she was lying right there. And at that point, uh, the courtroom kind of got silent, and they decided they were going to close the case for the day, and we'd come back again in another month when the case file was there. And
mm,
I mean, it was just one thing after another, everything they could. Well, when we did that later that night, after she caught the case investigator lying every time she opened her mouth, pretty much, my attorney called me crying and said, I'm sorry, I can't handle your case anymore. And I said, why? And she said, because there's one family court judge in this area. My mother and father built our law firm. And after today in court, I will never win another case if I continue on your case, and we'll lose the law firm. And I have a family to support. And I mean, I was devastated, but I understood. I understood what she was saying. Um, so when we did get back into court a month later, they were going to assign, or they did assign another attorney when she had turned in her paperwork that she wasn't going to be the attorney anymore. And that day in court, um, the judge had called me to the stand and asked me how Hailey was doing, and I said she's not doing well. You know, she's trying to do everything that they're saying for her to do, but they're saying no help from the family. Young girls have kids all the time, and the families help out. That
Right.
is a normal thing. That is not an issue. No, we want to see that she can take care of her on her own. I said,
Mm.
she's trying to finish school. She's not going to be able to do both the way you want it done. Um, then the judge decided she was going to go ahead, and she said she was ruling that to excuse our attorney, that we no longer needed legal counsel because this is a reunification case with mom, and that we didn't need to be involved in it. And I was like, oh, good, they're going to give her back.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that. And at the end of the hearing, after they'd called a recess, and the attorney that was assigned to us, the new one, he went ahead and left. Well, at the end of that hearing, we were told, the judge looked at me and said, and Mrs. Hall, I'm ordering you to be here at the next hearing. And I was like, okay. So I
Mm.
told my husband, I said, how can she ordered me to be there with no attorney? She just released my counsel, you know. And he was like, well, I'm sure they know what they're doing. And, and he's like, we just got to trust in the judicial system. It'll work out. And I'm like, it's been months at this point, months, 6 months, 7 months, something like that. And then the next hearing ended up being canceled due to weather. It was just, so we didn't get, we were supposed to go back into court actually the day after Hailey died, I believe. I'm not real sure on the dates. I'll have to double check that because I do have a lot of memory issues from the trauma that has gone on.
Hmm.
But then,
Doesn't sound like you have memory issues to me.
You're doing real good.
but
But it's a fiasco. It's a fiasco. They
Hmm.
take a family that's intact and they do everything they can to turn it into the case of the century. Like,
yeah,
and they throw every single resource at it because they can. The more they spend, the more they get.
Hmm.
It's so this case alone, if this was the only thing that happened to this family, it's shattering. It's enough to bring down the system for all of the missteps. But one important thing, I don't know if you want to say it, Kathy, but do you want to mention the name of the judge being the only child welfare juvenile
yeah,
judge?
I'll bring her up. I'll bring her up. I was getting to that part.
Okay.
Okay, so we were supposed to go to our next hearing, and Hailey had, at this point, she was working, not going to school because she was trying to make enough money to be able to get an apartment and be able to prove that she was able to support Brooklyn, which wasn't happening easily. Um, but she finally said, I can't do this and save money, came back home. And by then, um, it was November 6th of 2016.
So a whole year went by.
Yes, it was right out a year. Yes.
So the baby's now two.
Yeah. And Hailey had left that morning. She was going to go to work, and then she was going to, then she would be home. Well, I called her in the afternoon, and I was making her favorite meal. And I said, Hailey, I'm making tacos. Are you going to come? Are you going to be here for dinner? And she said, yeah, I'm getting ready to leave here right now. She had stopped at a friend's. And I said, okay. So I was cooking, and it was about 6:30, and she still wasn't there. And I thought, okay, she probably sat there and talked a few more minutes. And I started hearing a bunch of sirens and really close to the house. And I was like, I wonder what's going on. And then, I mean, you could tell the difference with when it's an ambulance or fire truck, whatever. And there was a lot of sirens, a lot. And um, I really felt uneasy because I'm waiting for her. And I told my husband, God, I hope she's all right because all these sirens. And he was like, oh, I'm sure she's fine. Well, then the sirens kind of stopped. And then I heard a second set of sirens. And I was like, what is going on? And something in the pit of my stomach just told me it was Hailey.
Mm,
And it was a little after 7. I told my husband, can you please go out and see our street was next to the main road. And it was just a cul-de-sac street. That's all there was the cul-de-sac of houses. And he said, I'm sure Hailey's fine. She's probably stuck in the traffic from whatever accident happened or whatever. And I said, I don't know. I've got a bad feeling. Please just go down there. So he came back, and I don't know what it was. I just couldn't bring myself to go out there. He came back and he said, no, some boy was crossing the street apparently, and somebody hit him. There was a hit and run. It was some boy.
mm,
And I was like, all right, well, I still wasn't convinced. I still had that feeling in the pit of my stomach. Anyway, about an hour later, no, not even that, about 30 minutes later, somebody knocked at the door and I opened it and it was Hailey's friend. And she said she was picking up Hailey to go to the movies. And I said, well, she's not here. She hasn't made it home. And she said, I called and I talked to her. David and I was bringing her home. I said, who's David? She said, her friend. He's bringing her home on his scooter. And I was like, well, they haven't made it here. Maybe they got stuck. She's like, no. I said, what are all those sirens? Because I'm still hearing them. What is going on? And she said, she was like 3 cars behind, and all of a sudden coming up, going towards my house. And all of a sudden, all the cars in front of her slammed on their brakes, and there was some boy laying out in the road. And his body was so twisted. She started to kind of get teary-eyed, and she said, I've never seen. She goes, I don't even think they were alive. They put a blanket over him and stuff, and they were sitting there. And then she said, and I couldn't go anywhere because the boy was in the street. And I said, what happened to him? And she said, I don't know. I think he might have been jaywalking. And
mm,
it's dark right there. And I was like, oh, all right. And she said it was so sad. The shoes are laying out in the street and hats and stuff. And that boy, she kept just saying that boy's body was so twisted like a pretzel. I've never seen a body twisted up like that. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I said, but she's not here. You can wait for her.
mm,
And she's like, well, I'll miss the movie and we're meeting other friends. So she's just gonna have to miss it. And I was like, all right. Well, she never came home. She never came home. It was about 12 o'clock at night. I told my husband, I said, I'm going to bed. I don't know what she's doing, but I said, I just have a bad feeling she's not answering her phone, nothing. So I went in and I was in my room for about 10 minutes, just starting to goes off mad and worried at the same time
mm,
because she wasn't at least answering me. And my husband appeared at the door and he said, babe, there's a couple of police officers at the door that want to talk to you. I think Hailey might have got in some trouble.
mm,
And I just knew. I knew right then. And I said, no, I told you those sirens were her. She's dead. And he was like, oh, no, you know what? Just go down there and talk to him. And so I went to the door and I opened the door and there was 2 plainclothes officers, 2 in uniform, and then a third person. I don't know who it was. Um, and they asked me if Hailey was there. And I said, no. And I said, but I need to know, is she alive or dead? And they said, well, what makes you say that? I said, I heard sirens earlier. She didn't come home. She was supposed to have been on her way home. I said, I have a bad feeling. And he said, well, we don't even know if it's her that we have. Does she have any birthmarks or tattoos or anything on her body that you can tell me about? And I was like, or scars. And I said, well, she has a scar right above her eyebrow from the chicken pox. Um, I'm trying to think. No, she doesn't have any birthmarks or really any other scars. She'd never really gotten hurt. And he's like, okay. And then he's like, well, does she have any tattoos? Well, she had just like maybe a month before this had gotten a tattoo right above her heart that said Brooklyn, her daughter's name.
mm,
And she had one other tattoo on her leg. And so I described the tattoo and they looked they were looking at me like they didn't recognize what I was saying. I started to feel a little bit at ease. And then he said, well, any names or anything on her? And then I remembered she had just gotten that Brooklyn. And I said, oh, yeah, she had just got one that says Brooklyn right above her heart. And that's when he looked at me and he said, okay, I need you to come with me.
Mm.
And I knew right then, I mean, I just kind of melted. I slid down the wall that I was leaning up against talking to them. And I opened the door and I told my husband to grab the keys, grab my shoes. And he said, no, we'll drive you to the hospital. And um, so I went inside and I got my stuff and told my husband to come on. And he kept telling me the whole way there, trying to reassure me. She probably just got hurt, I'm sure. And I asked him, I said, was that the sirens I've been hearing all night? And then as they go head towards the hospital, it's where they have to pass where she was hit. And everything's roped off. There's police everywhere. And I said, this was her. And he said, yes. But my husband's like, just, I'm sure she's all right. She's probably, she's probably just got some serious injuries and stuff, and it'll be okay. We were going up the elevator to the ICU, and it finally dawned on me. And I looked at my husband and said, she's brain dead. I said, he's like, you don't, I said, she couldn't tell him who she was.
Hmm.
And I mean, it just dawned on me. And so finally, we get upstairs, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. They said, the doctors want to talk to you before you go back. And it seemed like what was forever. It was probably 10 minutes. And I finally said, I'm going to kick the door in to get to my child if you don't open it for me, because it won't open unless it
Mm.
stays locked. And then a bunch of people came out, and a bunch of doctors and nurses from I don't even know where made a circle around me and my husband. They started talking and said she had been hit. Um, she had a brainstem hemorrhage. She'd already coded 3 times, and they were able to bring her back temporarily. She was on life support. She had internal bleeding that they weren't unable to stop in her pelvis area. Um, that her arm was broken, but she had this brainstem hemorrhage, intracranial and outer cranial hemorrhage. Her liver was lacerated, and they couldn't control the bleeding. They said, "What do you want us to do?" Her heart is going to stop again. It's not a matter of if; it's a matter of when. It could be now. It could be in an hour, but they were not going to be able to sustain life with her. Um, because she couldn't maintain her own blood flow. They'd already replaced every drop of blood in her body twice, and she was still bleeding out. And my at that point, my head is spinning. I'm trying to take in everything I'm hearing. I'm in shock. I just told him, "Let me see my child." Well, we need to know if you want us to try to resuscitate, because even if we're able to this time, it's only going to be a matter of minutes before it stops again.
Hmm.
Uh, we cannot, and if some miracle happened and she was able to survive, which she is not, keep that in mind. They said she would be a vegetable, never breathe again on her own or anything. She would lay in bed as a vegetable on life support for the rest of the time that she has. But they said, but it won't get to that part, because the life support can't keep the heart beating when they can't maintain their blood flow. And I once again told them, let me see my child. I was in the room with Hailey for about an hour and 20 to 30, 40 minutes, something like that. Um, and I asked him, what took you so long to get to me? This happened at 7 o'clock at night. You didn't show up at my house till midnight. And in Arkansas, it's where the Walmart home office is, and they have facial recognition, everything everywhere. And I'm sure they could have just taken her fingerprints and ran her. But we finally went in, and I expected machines to be everywhere when we got in the room, and there wasn't. The one thing that really stands out to me is her eyes were wide open the whole time, just one solid look, and she never blinked. her eyes never closed. They told me the only place I could touch her is at the top of one of her hands, uh, not to touch her anywhere else. And they kind of had her like sitting up a little bit. She wasn't laying flat. And she had the life support going in through her mouth and then some IVs, and that was it. Oh, and the heart monitor showing her heart rate and everything. Um, and I expected there would be stuff everywhere, by the way they were talking. And she had a couple scratches on her face, on the bridge of her nose here and on her cheeks. Um, Her nose looked like it had been a little runny. And they told me she was in no pain, that she wasn't feeling anything. I was trying to call her biological father in Arizona and her siblings in Colorado and California, because Hailey was the youngest. She was the baby. And nobody was answering. It's 1:30, 1:40 at night. Well, the machine started beeping and the alarm started going off, and they brought the crash cart in, and there was two doctors standing there and three or four nurses, and they said, we need to know what you want us to do. Um, and from the moment I got there and I touched Hailey's hand, it was cold and she was stiff. Um, she never blinked. And I said, does she even have a 1% chance of survival? And the main doctor, the head trauma doctor there, just looked at me and said, I'm sorry.
Mm.
And I mean, I couldn't reach anybody, and I only had a matter of seconds to make that final decision. But um, I said, then let her go in peace. I didn't want her to lay there like a vegetable the rest of her life. And it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. And I mean, if I would have seen anything from her, a twitch, anything, I mean, there was nothing. I later found out she had what they called doll's eyes. Um, I didn't know what that was at the time, but yeah. So I sat there with her and held her hand and promised her I would do everything I could to fight for justice for her. And I would raise Brooklyn to be happy and healthy and know every day who her mommy was and how much she loves her. And then her heart stopped.
Mm. I'm so sorry. I don't
Thank you.
even know what to say. This is just terrible.
Thank you. Well, we had to wait a week to get all the family in town, and we had Hailey's service. The Foster family had shown up at the service. We had hired a new attorney, and we're told that, and this attorney used to be the prosecuting attorney for the state in family court. Well, the family court in that area only had one family court judge, one family courtroom. Um, and I didn't know really anything about the people out there because we hadn't lived there for very long. And then, we'd only been there a few months before they took Brooklyn. And then, the whole time we were fighting to get Brooklyn home and not paying much attention. Well, I started doing some research on the judge, and I don't know if you're familiar with the show 19 Kids and Counting that was on TLC. Well, as I'm reading it up and I start seeing these stories coming out that the judge, which was Judge Stacy Zimmerman at the time, the same judge that we had, was the judge that ordered. She'd appeared on the show quite a bit, and I guess was paid for it. But apparently, she had ordered the Springdale Police Department to destroy all the records with Josh Duggar, who's now convicted after child porn was found in his workplace. And now, just last week, another one of the boys were arrested for CA also. Um, but I start reading all of this on her, and I'm going, what in the world? And then it kind of just started clicking that, I mean, I knew the whole time something was wrong, very, very wrong with what was going on, and the way they were acting with Brooklyn. But then we had to focus because we got a new attorney. We filed the paperwork, and we were told that the case was no longer a case because Hailey had expired, and they that Brooklyn should be given to the next of kin since there was no case any longer. So we get into court. We go in with our new attorney. All the paperwork's filed. Everything is done.
All your hopes are up.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
thinking we're going to take Brooklyn home that day, and we hadn't seen her since Hailey's death, which was in November. This is in January. We walk into the courtroom with we walked up to into the courthouse, and like I said, it was only one courtroom in there, and that was Judge Zimmerman's. And we're waiting for my attorney to show up. Well, the side door opens, and I see my attorney sitting at a table with the DHS worker and the state and everybody, and they're sitting in there laughing. And I'm like, why are they sitting in there laughing? And why is he in there with them? And so he comes out, and we go into the courtroom, and they start talking about what had been going on with the case and that the father had filed for custody of Brooklyn. But then, through his attorney, and he lived in Florida. And he said he'd moved to Florida while Hailey was pregnant. But um, they said that 10 days later, for some reason, his attorney called back and they withdrew the petition. And they hadn't heard anything else from him. Um, and then the judge started asking, and I had no idea. I wasn't talking to the baby's father at the time. I was still very upset with him, very upset with everybody at the time after losing my daughter. But they kept asking if Brooklyn was adoptable, and my attorney wasn't saying anything. And they kept saying, "Yeah, she's adoptable, and the foster family has interest in wanting to adopt." And I'm writing on the pad of paper sitting there. Why are you not objecting? Why are you not saying anything? He's like, they're just covering their bases right now. Will be heard next. And I'm like thinking, okay, but wasn't this our hearing? They
Mhm.
didn't set up the hearing, we did. And anyway, so they go on and on and on, and uh, went ahead and said that they were going to remove the father after he dropped out and whatever. And I'm waiting and waiting for them to say something to any of us. And then the judge calls a recess, and the bailiff says, "Okay, everybody, go ahead and leave the courtroom." And we were like, "Oh," so I said, "Why didn't you say anything to Stephen Kay, my attorney at the time?" And he said, "She's just taking the recess. We're going back in, and then it'll be our turn to present our case." And I said, "All right." And I mean, I just had that uneasy feeling
Mm.
again. And so we walked out of the courtroom doors. We're still in the courthouse, and behind everybody exits, and we're all standing there. And all of a sudden, the doors lock. Oh no, right before the doors locked, the bailiff stuck his head out and he said, "That's it. Court's over for the day. Go home." And he locked the door, turned around, shut the door, and locked it. I could not believe. I was like, "What in the heck is going on, Stephen? What is going on? We didn't." And he was like, I don't know. I'm going to have to find out and whatever." And I was like, "No, you're fired. You should have been ejecting the whole time. She was not adoptable. She should have been coming home with us, and they shouldn't have even been discussing it. It shouldn't have been a matter of a discussion." I was very upset.
Mhm.
And then, I mean, all I kept seeing was in my head as I'm saying this to him is him sitting there laughing with the workers in that back room before we went in. And I was like, So I fired him, and we went to another attorney that was in the next town up. I wasn't about to hire another attorney to go in, and the same thing happened. And when we went in and he went over everything, he said, "None of this is right. Nothing is right." So he filed for a new court date. We were waiting and waiting and waiting. And it had been 3 months, and I kept calling every week. "Did we get a court date yet? Did we get it?" "No, we're still waiting. The courts are backed up. There's only one family court judge, and she's got a lot of cases." And I knew the name of the foster family, so I looked on Facebook, and I hadn't seen Brooklyn at this time in 8 months. Um, and I looked online and at their Facebook page, and there's a picture of my granddaughter and their family all standing around some sign. And it was a Friday night, and I was so excited just to see a picture of her. I'm like, my God, she's grown so much. And I blow the picture up a little bit, and the sign said, um, "Today, or Finally,
Oh,
as of today, I'm Brooklyn. It's adoption day. I'm finally Brooklyn Manning.
Mm.
I I was I can't even tell you what I went through. I felt like I had just lost Hailey all over again.
Mm.
It's a Friday night when I found it. I couldn't get a hold of my attorney until Monday. And when I called him and told him, he said, "No, we're still waiting on the court date. That they can't do that." And I'm like, "I'm telling you, this is in front of the courthouse with the sign." And I sent it over to him. He said, "Let me call you back." He called me back 2 days later, and I'd been calling his office nonstop after that to try to get him to tell me what's going on. 2 days later, he called and he asked us to come in the office, and he sat us down and looked at us and he said, "You got screwed."
and all of this is going on while they are
While we're going to court,
while
yes,
they're charging Sergio, what's his last name?
Rodriguez,
Rodriguez, with leaving the scene of an accident,
yes,
resulting,
and
was it
yes,
resulting in death?
yes. So they told us that the chances are he was only going to get 2 years probation, and I was like, "What?"
That so she's got two absolutely devastating cases that she's
Well,
trying to
let's back
deal
up.
with.
I'm sorry. I should have explained this. After he hit the kids, Haley flew up on the hood. David and the scooter were trapped underneath of the truck. Um, he kept going for well, he swerved when Haley's on the hood. He swerved the truck
Mm.
and knocked her off headfirst into the road, going 71 miles an hour. It was only a 35-mile-an-hour zone. Um, he kept going. David was trapped underneath. When the all of a sudden, I guess apparently from what I'm told, sparks started coming from underneath the truck again. And so he pulled into some apartment complex a little over a mile later, and realized that the scooter was underneath there. And but when he pulled in, David's torso came out. He was still alive. He was screaming for help at the top of his lungs. Um, and the man didn't call for help. He didn't do anything. He left the truck where it was and disappeared. They had a three-state manhunt for him. His picture on the TV, and as he was, it was election day when they finally caught him, 2016. And I turned on the TV, and all you could see for the last 2 days prior was the man's picture was right there nonstop on the TV that they were looking for him. Um, I received a phone call at about 4 o'clock from the police department telling me they finally got him.
Mm.
He was there at the police station. And about 40 minutes later, I get a call back telling me they wanted to let me know before the press got a hold of it that he'd been released on bond.
Oh.
I was like, he had a bond? No, I don't know of anybody else that gets arrested at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and has already seen a judge, been arrested, booked in, seen a judge all in 40 minutes and has a, anyway,
When did you find out he was an
illegal
illegal?
8 months later. They weren't going to charge him with anything. Well, I had taken a picture of Hailey. I needed to remind myself. I knew I would second guess not letting them try to resuscitate. So I took a picture of her there in the in the ICU unit after her heart stopped so that I could remind myself every time I had these thoughts that I should have tried, that I made the right decision, that she wasn't there. Um, so I had blown that up into an 8 by 10. I finally got in with the prosecuting attorney. I got a reconstructionist to come up because at first they were trying to say he wasn't even speeding. And then they finally, 7 months later, took the black box out of his truck. They didn't do that in the beginning. And they watched all the cameras and everything else and saw that he had been speeding. And that's when the black box and everything is what gave us the 71 miles an hour. That and the reconstructionist that I brought up from Little Rock to do it. I finally got in with the prosecuting attorney, and we were waiting to go in to talk to him when the reconstructionist informed me then, who was also, by the way, a Little Rock police officer, and he was the best in the state, and he did it for me. But that's when he informed me that the man was illegal. I did not know before that. I had no idea. And I said, how did he get a bond if he's here, if he's
Mm,
illegal? But we'd been going, to his first hearing, and he sat there laughing during the whole thing and
mm,
pled not guilty. And he actually had paid a $20,000 cash bond, $20,000 for the attorney that he hired on the case, which was the ex prosecuting attorney for the state that had just retired and went into private practice a few months earlier. And then my attorney told me at the time, he said, I'm going to tell you how he got the bond. She made a deal before he ever got there. She was already talking to him, and that's why he had a bond that quick.
Who's the she?
Um, his Sergio's attorney. But anyway, so we went in, and I had blown that picture up of Hailey to an 8 by 10. Um, and I put it out on the table. He was sitting on one side of this meeting table, and I was on the other. And I put it in front of him and left it there the whole time. While I talked. And I said, I understand accidents happen every day. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm not inhuman. But when you know that you have hit somebody and there's a body of a young girl on the hood of your truck, you don't slow down, you don't stop, but you swerve into the other lane at 71 miles an hour, you're making that conscious decision to commit murder. And he sat there for a few minutes, and then he said, I agree with you. And I'm going to change these charges to second-degree murder. And he did. He had a press conference because it was all over the news out there. And
mm,
he put the second-degree murder charge on him. But they didn't rearrest him and make him rebond out, or they just upped the charges. They put battery on David, who did survive, but he was a double amputee at that point.
oh,
He lost both of his legs at 20 years old. He was in a wheelchair. Um, but David did end up losing his life 2 years later, caused from a blood clot due to losing his legs, went to his heart, and he died. Um, and they would not up the charges at that point either. Told me it'd be double jeopardy and all kinds of stuff. Well, come to find out that's not true. Victims die all the time, and they go back and they up the charges.
mhm,
They just weren't going to deal with it, and they'd already done the plea deal. So he got 10 years for manslaughter on Hailey, 5 years for battery on David, and 2 years for leaving the scene. This gets even better. When I they were going after 68 years on him. Um, and then a new prosecuting attorney came in right before trial was supposed to start, and they did a plea deal for 17 years. Uh, we were all upset, including David at the time, but we had no choice. We were told that it was left up to the state to make that choice. We had no choice in it. We had no say so. I had gone to the press during all of this, trying, to make sure that the charges had gotten higher than leaving the scene. Um, and then I started working with one of the state legislators out there to change the hit and run laws anyway. I mean, it wouldn't matter if you backed into somebody at Walmart or if you killed somebody, the time was the same there. 2 years was the most you could get. So I was working with him, and we were going to start changing the laws as far as that goes. But then when the immigration part of it came up, the legislator I was working with was a Democrat. I was never into politics. I still am not.
mhm,
I'm not political. I was a mother raising her kids, uh, a military spouse. My husband had been injured in Iraq, and he was now disabled after being hit by a landmine. So, I mean, I was doing the best that I could, but uh, the legislator I was working with happened to be a Democrat, and once he found out the status of Rodriguez, he backed out of everything. He wouldn't do it at that point. So I would been writing a lot on Twitter
mhm.
and everything about everything that happened and how he only got to 17 years. And well, come 18 months into his sentence, um, and I'm going to back up a little bit in a minute and go back to Linda Collins Smith, but 18 months into his sentence, I get a phone call, and he wasn't sentenced till 2018. Um, Hailey died in November of 2016. So it ended up being like 15 months until he was sentenced. But um, he, um, I get a message from the parole board saying that he was up for early parole release. And I'm going 18 months. What the heck? So I'm having a fit that they're going to let him out on parole. Um, and he's only done 18 months in jail. And so I called down to the prosecuting attorney's office and they said, we don't know why that is. She's like, they played stupid. Oh, we didn't realize he was coming up for parole. So then I called the prison and I talked to them there, or I called parents of murdered children and they got the information from me. They called me back and said, what they didn't tell me during the parole hearing was they had him down as a nonviolent offender on his plea deal, which means he only did, what was it, 38 days a year on his sentence or something. And that's why he was up for parole, that I could go and fight the parole hearing. I have a slight chance of getting at least one denial, but then we'll have to go back to every year for a new parole hearing until he is approved for it. I said 1 year, every year I have to relive this all over again.
Mm.
And I'm now living in Colorado. I had left Arkansas. And they said, well, the most you can get is a 2 year. And they're like, but we've only ever seen it. And the lady I was talking to said, I've been here 20 years. I've seen it one time, that they got a 2 year denial. And I said, well, that's what I'll be there. I'll fight his release. And I have every year. We've been to 3 hearings now, and I fought everyone and gotten 2 year denials, which, I mean, it's still every other year we have to relive this in front of the parole board. I mean, I don't know how anybody ever expects us to heal. But, in the meantime, after all this is going on, Angel Families was just starting up, and I was approached by Marianne Mendoza, the head of it, and asked me if I had wanted to join in with them to tell Hailey's story. And, my first thought was, yeah, I want to do this because I promised her I would get justice for her. This man, there's no justice in this sentence and what's going
Mm-mm.
on.
Mm-mm.
And I thought, okay, if I get it out there to the public, we'll have better chances of him getting denied at the parole hearings. And then in the meantime, I'd been writing a lot on Twitter, and I had talked to 3 or 4 different um, legislators, and nobody was doing anything to help. Everybody made every promise. Well, I get this message on Twitter at the time, X now, saying, none of this, and I was writing about Brooklyn because that's what I was trying to get help with. I figured the Angel Families part would help with the justice. I need to work on Brooklyn, getting her home like I promised. I made 2 promises to my daughter as her heart stopped, and I wasn't going to stop until, I was able to fulfill both of them. And so I was writing stuff about Brooklyn and what had happened. And I was like, this is so hard going day to day. And I get this message from Linda Collins Smith on Twitter, and it says, this doesn't have to be so hard. Call me. And she put her own personal phone number on there. And I looked at it and I was like, is this lady crazy? Putting her own personal cell phone number out on social media like this? So I went ahead and I called her and we were talking. And she didn't know the illegal alien part of it at this time. She only knew what I was telling her about Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And her voice started to crack by the time I was done. And she said, where's her mother? And that's when I said her mother died. And I told her that part of everything that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, by an illegal alien in this state. And I said, yes. So she said, and her voice started cracking. You could tell she was trying not to cry.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I'm going to look into this and I'm going to call you back because I find this very hard to believe this is happening here. And I said, okay. Well, it had been 3 or 4 days. I hadn't heard anything back. And I figured just another one with a promise. It isn't going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And she did. She called and she was crying this time. As soon as she started talking, she said, I am so sorry. I cannot believe this is going on. I want to help you. I don't have long because I lost my reelection campaign. She said, but I'm going to do everything I can to get Brooklyn home with you before the end of my term. So then she called me the next day and asked me if I would go to Arkansas and testify in front of the entire Senate about what happened, along with the illegal alien thing. And I told her yes. But we talked every day, every couple of days for about a month. And then I went out there to testify, and we had gotten a hotel room in Little Rock, and she ended up staying at the hotel, and we talked till 4 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't know it when I walked in to testify that day that she was head of the Judiciary Committee, that she would be the head one up there talking. And they had the police chief there and different people there all testifying about what happened. It was mainly on the immigration side of it, but in the beginning, she brought up the case, and other senators were asking questions, and she'd already been investigating DHS before this, but I'm not going to get into a lot of details about her because it's in the book and it's still really painful for me.
Mm.
But she was married to a family court judge and was going through a divorce. After I testified for her in front of Senate, we talked every single day at that point. So then she invited me to come out and do a few interviews with her, and I did. And then I went home, and then I went out a second time to do interviews with her. Or no, in the meantime, we went out to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Trump. It's when he called the national emergency back then in 2019, I believe, there in the Rose Garden. And Linda went and accompanied me as my friend and backing all of us. But I went out there again after that in May. It was like Memorial Weekend. It was Memorial Weekend. The weekend right before it. And we did a couple interviews, and she told me then that she'd gotten a hold. Somehow she ended up, and she was scared to death of her ex-husband. He used to abuse her and she would hide it. Told me that she had walked in on him and found him watching child porn on his work computer at the courthouse. It was after hours that night.
This is Lindsay
Um,
Collins Smith,
yes.
because the shorts on this are going to go crazy.
No, there's a lot on it. I was filming with ABC at one time for 2020 episode with Josh Moreland, but some things happened and they cut it out at the last minute because for my own safety. Um, but anyway, so Linda had found on this computer a lot of information, and she ended up with the laptop, or the computer is what I'm trying to say, in the end. And the stuff that she found on there was just devastating to her. Money being flowed through DHS, all kinds of different stuff, and it's all in the book. But she wanted. We were going out to Washington. She was going to work with Bear, who was backing Angel Families at the time, and I was going to be her assistant. So she went back out there just to do final arrangements on the job, and we were going to look for an apartment. And at the last minute, I could not. I was in Arkansas with her, and I had been all week, but I had to come home, and I was going to meet her there later during the week. Um, so she went on. I left back to Colorado. She went back to. She went out to Washington, D.C., and then she went out to her cousin's house in Arizona for her cousin's birthday. She returned home on Labor Day that night, and I was trying to call her the next morning, all morning, because we had a big interview, and she was going to expose what she had found on the Doc Washburn show. Well, she wasn't answering, and it was really strange to me because if Linda's phone ever died, and we talked multiple times every day, if her phone had died or whatever, she would text me and say, "Hey, phone died, it's charging, I'll call you back." She was never one to just leave you hanging. And she was always on social media. In fact, if you look at her social media now, she's got me and her all over it. But she wasn't answering. And then Tuesday, Doc Washburn had called and he said, "Hey, I can't get a hold of Linda, but the flooding is so bad here in Little Rock, we're probably going to have to postpone till Thursday." Because we were supposed to film with him on Wednesday. And I said, "Okay." I haven't been able to reach her either. It's really weird. Her phone keeps going to voicemail. He goes, "Well, you know what? The last flood we had, she was out doing sandbags and everything else. She's probably out there helping with, the flooding and the sandbagging and stuff." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, maybe." But I knew Linda well enough to know that she would have been on social media at least.
Mhm.
And everybody else's phones were working in the area, so why wasn't hers? And so this went on all weekend. I finally got a hold, and I'm in too far away to just run over to her house and check on her. I got a hold of somebody, and they said, "Let me see if I can go run up there." And they were like 4 hours from where she lives. And I got a call back saying, "Well, I'm going to go tomorrow because there's just too much I've got going on to go last minute." I said, "All right." Well, the next day, the person calls me and says, "I need you to sit down."
Mm.
And my heart just dropped. I said, okay. And I'd been calling everybody all week trying to figure out what was going on with Linda, because I hadn't heard a word from her, and she knew the big interview, everything. And she said, they found Linda. She is no longer, um, she's expired. Um, and it wasn't natural causes. And I mean, I don't know. I think once again, shock kind of set in, and I just remember being on the floor crying, not again, not again. I mean, we had gotten so
Mm.
close. And, and I think
She's
part
like
of me
Nancy
knew.
Schaefer. 10 years after Nancy Schaefer was murdered with her husband, when she was on the verge of exposing CPS, Child Protective Services, she was murdered.
Well, I believe there was a large cover up, and there's a lot more detail in the book. But you know,
In the
I
book,
know it.
voices
Yeah.
will not be silenced.
Hmm.
And you know, I mean, it was just devastating to me. And you know, I'm still fighting these parole hearings. I'm
Oh.
still fighting. We've gone through 4 attorneys, never gotten back into court. They've taken our money. They've drained us out of all of our resources to get an attorney to get back into court. But finally, I did get an attorney to help me, and went through everything. She found so many counts of fraud on the judge, on DHS, that we were told. She told me, she said, I know this case is winnable because there's enough fraud to overturn everything. She said, but I can't handle this case because I was Linda's divorce attorney, and Linda will come up into the court hearings. And if I that opens it up, that it will ruin my attorney client privilege with her. And I'm not willing to risk my own life to do that. But I'd be happy to pro hawk somebody in under my license and be, you know, work with the hearings and everything from the side. And I said, okay, well, then COVID hit.
Mm.
And I hadn't heard from I had been talking to my attorney. I even went out and visited with her, and stayed at her house for that weekend. And uh, I hadn't heard from her. And then, so I called Doc Washburn and I asked him if he had heard from her. And he said, you didn't hear? And I said, hear what? He said, she died from COVID.
Mm.
And that was, you know, I mean,
Mm.
it was, um, so now we're just kind of at a standstill. And, you know, any of the attorneys that were working in Arkansas that we hired, they were, oh, yeah, we got this, we got this, we got this. And then nothing. If we ever even got into court.
You're talking
Um,
about the CPS case?
Yes, on Brooklyn. And now we're just at a standstill trying to wait for somebody that will help us with the case to get into court since we have enough fraud on it that we can get it overturned. And we have not seen Brooklyn since. Hailey died. She is now going to be, or she is now 10.
Mm.
Um,
Did it,
and
did anybody try and
I've
harm
tried
you?
contacting this people straight through, the foster family that had her, that adopted her. In fact, they contacted me
Mm.
um, after the adoption and said, we know how much you and your family all love Brooklyn. Um, so we would like if you would continue emailing her. And when she gets old enough, we'll let her know she was adopted and that there's emails from you when we decide it's the right time.
Oh.
Talk about rubbing salt into the wounds. And they were Walmart executives.
Oh.
Um, and they still receive a check to this day for Brooklyn from Walmart for adopting out of foster care, which is a big thing out in that area. And
Hmm.
then I have some messages from one of my attorneys telling me that, and I still have them, telling me that Judge Stacy Zimmerman was procuring children on demand. Well, about 3 months after that message came through, Paul Peterson was arrested doing the trafficking of children through 3 different states: Arkansas, Arizona, and Utah. And they were all done through Judge Stacey Zimmerman's. The illegal adoptions were done through her courtroom also. I mean, how do you do that many and nobody notices? You know, I just one thing after another. Um, so then I had met Terri, and we had been talking, and she said, "How much of your story do you want me to put to write about?" I said, "If you're going to tell it, tell the whole thing. Tell the whole thing." And so we worked for about 2 years on the book, and then the book was released. And then I got another phone call from that same attorney telling me that apparently, and this is 5 months after the book came out, and it was one of the top sellers for a while on Amazon. I still haven't read the book. I mean, I know what's in it, but I haven't read it. It's just it's too much for me right now. And one day I'll read it. But we were notified then that Judge Zimmerman had decided to take an early retirement out of nowhere.
No charges
Uh,
Yeah.
against her, though. Now,
Yeah, like they all do.
what I wanted to say, didn't the family that adopted Brooklyn, didn't you think they were trying to trap you into violating restraining order when she
oh
sent
yeah,
out the emails?
yes. And in fact, she even tried to call me one time on Facebook. And when I answered, they hung up. And so I tried calling back, but they never answered it. But that was the last we've heard from them. Right after the adoption was done, they packed Brooklyn and their family up um, and moved to Wisconsin. I mean, I don't even think the adoption was finalized yet. I think you had to wait a certain amount of time. But my attorney at the time did file when he found out about the adoption. He filed a motion to reconsider on the adoption. And I mean, it had been months, and I'm calling every week saying, "Is there a response?" And I said, "Does she have a time limit to answer these?" And they said, he told us then, he said, "No, there is no time limit to respond to it." He said, "But here's the thing." And I said, "Okay, well, we need to file an appeal or something." And he said, "You can't until that motion is answered." And she denies it. But then even if we wanted to file an appeal, you're going to have to hire a new attorney because I don't do them. And then to get all the court records, just to get them all printed, it's going to be about $10,000. And then it's $10,000 for the attorney. It was going to be $30,000, which we didn't have after kept hiring attorneys and burying my 18-year-old. We just didn't have the money. And I said, "Okay, well, we'll wait till the motion comes in." Um, which still to this day has not been answered, by the way, the motion to reconsider. But he then told us, he said, "I'm going to be honest with you." He said, if you come up with the money and you file, he said, what's going to happen is they'll go up, and yeah, I'm 100% sure it'll get kicked back, but it goes right back in front of her, not any other judge. So if you win the appeal, it goes back in front of her to re-rule on it. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
That's how they do it. But if she's no longer in that division, I don't think it does. But
Well,
I did want you to remember to talk about why you left Arkansas.
well, we were being threatened, first of all. Every time we even left the house, we were being pulled over. We got to the point where, well, not only that, but I mean, it was hard for me to even breathe. And I had to have to go past where Hailey was hit all the time. But it just got to be too dangerous. And um,
What
we
about your
came down.
house? What about your house?
What about it?
The fire.
Oh, no, that was here in Colorado.
Oh,
Yeah, what happened is when we found out about that first parole hearing coming up, it was set for 2020. No, 2019. No, I'm sorry, it was 2020. Um, and Linda had just died, and this had been going on for a few months and court hearings. And the lady that they accused of killing Linda um, pled not guilty. And Kathryn, the attorney, Linda's ex-divorce attorney, knew her well and had been talking to her. And she said, "I'm telling you," I said, "I think she was involved because Linda had told me that there had been money missing and stuff." But I don't believe, even if you watch the videos, there's two people under the sheet going into her house after she was unalived. And I knew the lady Becky. She had fibromyalgia so bad she could hardly bend over at Linda's hotel to make the beds, let alone carry out an unalived person and put them in the driveway that I think probably weighed about the same or more than she did. No drag marks, no nothing. And But anyway, so we are like 10 days out from the first parole hearing. I'm getting ready to go to Arkansas. They're getting ready to have another hearing with the lady who had been pleading not guilty the whole time. And it's about 5 o'clock in the evening. And I walked into my kitchen and I had started, somebody was showing me how to make homemade tamales, one of my friends. When all of a sudden she was like, "What was that?" And she opens the side door that goes out to my garage and my entire house. A rolling ball of fire goes running through my house. Um, and the smell and that was so strong. It ended up, they said, being a gas leak that they could never find an ignition point. And they had three of the best state's investigators come out and crawl through the ashes and everything else. And we were told by one of them this had to have been a professional job. And then one of the neighbors said, "Well, there was a gas guy over there on the side of your house about 30 minutes before your house caught on fire." And the gas line came in through the garage. My house was, if we would not have been in the kitchen at the time, right by the back door, and we would have been downstairs in the basement, because here in Colorado, a lot of most houses have basements. We would not have made it out alive. It went so quick that even my cat fell over and died 3 feet before the back door that was wide open that I went out of. And my two little dogs didn't make it out. They died from the smoke inhalation. Um, and then the next morning, all of a sudden, the lady pled guilty, gave no explanation of killing Linda. And then a week later was the parole hearing. Um, I don't know which of the two ever, if, and I'm not going to make any accusations, but it's awfully coincidental with the time frame, but both of the things going on out of Arkansas. And I believe that if they would not have done what they did with Hailey, I believe Hailey would have been here today. She would not have been out on a scooter. She would have been at home with her baby. There is so much more to this case. And like I've said, there's a lot more details in the book.
The book called Voices That Will Not Be Silenced by Terri LaPoint, that's available on Amazon. And
Mhm.
I think the one point of clarification I would like you to make right now, Kathy, is what just a little more about um, where Linda was um, offed and how where she ended up
Um, she was in her home.
in the kitchen.
Uh, yes, in the kitchen, and she was found in the driveway under a tarp a week later. And
Because of the flooding that was going on, and there was all this commotion in the state at the time, right?
well, no, actually, the flooding was going on in Little Rock, 4 hours from her house.
Oh, okay.
It had nothing to do with around her neighborhood, but I mean, yeah, Linda going to work in DC, I think scared a lot of people because she had that computer and she knew what was on it. Um, and her going to DC, I can tell you this. Some of the information that she had told me did tie a little back to Epstein and him flying into a airfield there not far from her home and visiting the Lord's Ranch there. And her husband was also on the board at the Lord's Ranch.
Mm.
There was a
The
lot
judge
to it.
husband, the family court judge husband.
Now, he, after the inappropriate behavior on the computer was brought out, he was disrobed. But then they allowed him to work in the police department evidence office there for a while or doing something in the police department. I can't remember.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And all I can say, Marianne, is this lady and her husband and her family, she's looking after grandchildren right now.
Mhm.
Yeah,
They're
I'm raising a 5-year-old that I've had since birth, after Brooklyn. I don't know why we were good enough for one granddaughter and not the other, but
Mhm.
but this family, it's almost I you have to be, Kathy, you have to be so strong and so
I had two choices. I could lay down and die with my daughter, or I can get up and fight like I promised her. And my first thing was I was going to lay down and die with her. But then, I kept seeing Brooklyn's little face in my head
Mm,
and remembering my promise. And I did. I got up and I fought, and I'm still fighting. And one day I hope that we have find an attorney honest enough to help us to keep that promise to Hailey.
We are all praying for that. Believe me. And
Thank you.
you're a beautiful, beautiful person
mhm.
with an
Thank you.
unbelievable spirit.
I don't think so. I think I'm a mom and a grandmother who love their daughter and love their grandchildren.
I thank you for telling your story. I can't imagine reliving it again today.
Yeah. Well, I have to. I have to because it's the only way that I know how to fight. That's all I have is my voice.
Hmm.
Yep. So your picture should be on here too. A voice that will not be silenced.
Right.
I believe I think there is a couple in the book with Linda and I together.
Yep. It's a really well done book. I mean, is this the first book that Terry's written? No, I think she had another one on.
No, she did a couple stories in the medical kidnap book, but this is her first actual full book.
She started off as uh, either a reporter on midwives.
Um, no, she was helping deliver the babies. Yes.
Okay.
She wasn't a reporter about it. Yeah.
Oh,
No,
that
she
was
was
what she
actually
did.
doing it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes. And then she started hearing the stories and got involved in it. And Terry's awesome. We visited each other's homes. We know each other's families well, and prayed together more times than I can tell you. And she has been there for me when I needed strength to carry on. And she's meant a lot to me. And, even with angel families now, we are working with the American Border Story, who is awesome with getting our stories out there. And we went to the White House a few weeks ago and about 2 months ago now. And Hailey was honored there at the White House
Mhm.
when President Trump did a candle lighting ceremony and so forth. So, and we have our next parole hearing this August.
Oh,
So it's coming up pretty quick, and that's what I'm working on now.
All right. Well,
yeah. I thank you both for coming on and telling your story and getting Terri LaPoint's book out there, Voices That Will Not Be Silenced. Debbie, is there anything you'd like to add? If anyone needs to contact either of you, do you want them to come through me or your
Yeah, they can go through you. That's fine.
Okay,
After the house um, incident, I try not to give my personal information out. So if you want to give me the information, anybody that's trying to make contact, that'd be fine.
we'll do. We'll do.
and I'm happy to share my email. It's Carol with two R's and two L's, Carroll, Debbie, Debbie 73 @yahoo.com. And Kathy answers the phone all the time. She's amazing. So
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you both. I really appreciate it. Don't jump off, okay? Slam the Gavel's a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and share. Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and other platforms I don't know about. Again, feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. Thank you so much, Debbie Carroll and Kathryn Hall, and I totally appreciate you speaking out.
thank you so much,
Thank you.
Marianne, for all that you do.
Thank you.